The world-renowned novelist Professor Chinua Achebe said, "Nobody can teach me who I am. You can only describe a part of me. But who I am and what I am is something I will have to find out myself." My advice to you, don't set your goals on what people deem important. Hi everyone, you're welcome to my channel. I'm Ifeanyi Chukwani, and on today's episode, we're going to discuss the African value system. Sometimes I used to hear people say we've lost our value. I believe you've heard it. But each time I hear this, I actually deduce that there must be some kind of recognizable trait which informs the African man of his values. But is it true that we're losing our value? Let's get into the business. I can't talk about the African value without talking about our cultural diversity. A Muluba of DR Congo is culturally different from an Igbo man of Nigeria. A Zulu has a different culture from a Nua of South Sudan. A Burundian has a different culture from an Afanti of Ghana. Just the way you have different cultures, so are their values. So I want you to understand the plurality of the African people and how contentious it is to talk about the African value and philosophy. So diversity actually is a reality in Africa. But despite the differences in our diversity, there's a meeting point as regards the African value. I mean, what Africans take to be of great value. So to affirm a part of Africa does not negate the fact of the whole of Africa. But before I proceed, I want you to know there are two classes of Africans. First are those who, despite Western influences, struggle for authenticity to preserve our identity and not do what colonizing did to the minds of Africans. And then secondly are those working relentlessly to preserve the Western culture in Africa. What class do you fall in? The pre-colonial African society is the golden years of African value. Those era, Africans were not distracted by foreign influences. So Africans practiced their values almost exclusively. But what are the African values? I will highlight 5 points. The first point being the family system. The traditional African society places most value on the family unit since it's the cradle of human society. The African value system is such that someone's fulfillment in a family is predicated on the success of every other member of the family. And then secondly is the marriage institution. Marriage is an institution that is governed by social and religious norms in the African society. Marriage in the African society is between a man and a woman. No room for same-sex marriage. As a point of fact, the African society frowns at sex between people of same sex. I mean man and man or woman and woman. In the African society, marriage is largely polygamous. There's no room for monogamy. In fact, monogamy is not an African thing. I hope I'm not causing a problem. Communalism and social security system. Africans value the well-being of each other and their safety concerns. There is mutual assistance for each other. The haves help those who do not have. And when a visitor meets you eating in the African setting, he rushes to wash his hand and quickly joins in the meal. During farming season, Africans help each other in the farm. You know, in the traditional African society, rendering of help does not come with monetary gain. And then fourthly, the African traditional religion. The traditional African society believes in immortality and the worship of ancestors. In fact, to the African man, religion is sine qua non. It is indispensable. An average African is incurably religious. Religion defines his perspective on the worldview. There is no being in Africa without a superior being. Fifthly, African legal system, land ownership, and conflict resolution. In the traditional African society, ownership of land is owned at the family level, then distributed to each member of the family. Under the traditional African society, the importance of order and peace cannot be overemphasized. So laws, customs, rules constitute the moral code and ethics of our society. In some African society, while you commit, you commit a crime, you could be punished. And then in some, not only you, but the entire community. These are some of the core values of the traditional African society. But globalization has changed a whole lot. In the face of the onslaught from globalization, technological and scientific discoveries, the African values face the threat of total annihilation. Today, the world is described as a global village, an interaction between cultures and the exchange of ideas and adoption of new ideas continue to affect the African value. But are we going to survive the onslaught? Africa is not the only continent currently experiencing neocolonialism or the influences of the West. I mean, Asians, China, India, Singapore were all former colonies, and their traditional values have undergone, processes as a result of interaction with the West. And the only difference between us and them is that they made extra effort to ensure the survival and relevance of their values in the global arena. The Chinese culture and value is globally recognized. In fact, the Chinese language is one of the languages used in the United Nations. To be honest, African values are in limbo, in a state of uncertainty. And the more it remains in this state, the weaker it gets. And the weaker it gets, the greater the chances of it being colonized by Western values and the Asian values. There's a place for the African value in the global discourse, but only Africans must wittingly cultivate and nurture those values to be seen and appreciated in the 21st century. Colonial period is gone, but its legacy still persists. But we can mitigate its effect by constantly patronizing our core values as Africans. I mean, the most spoken language in Africa is Swahili. Why don't institutions in African continent incorporate Swahili in their curricula? What is the African value without a known language? Finally, I believe the African value will become more relevant when we Africans make it a duty to invest in the continent and proudly display her rich heritage. It is bad that most African leaders never speak or have never spoken the local African language on international duty. But countries like Cuba and China are projecting their language in the same international function. Most of the world's top corporations are sustained by the family business model. Africa is our family unit. Our values for seniority is a major staple in Africa. There's much the world can learn from Africa. So let's take it out now and be serious. We should stop playing this blame game and playing the victim card and start taking the initiative. So I'm done for today. Kindly like, share, and subscribe. Catch you up next week. Bye.